Welcome. Today, I have the absolute honor of speaking with Mani Chakrabarty from ASBB Economics and Research. I'm so happy to be chatting with you today, Mani.
Oh, thank you, Shauna. It's a pleasure to chat with you as well.
So tell me about ASBB Economics and Research. What do you do?
Sure. Well, Shauna, I just would like to say that, we're pretty similar in the sense that we're both rural. So I'd start with saying that proudly, ASBB Economics and Research is a rurally based organization. And we try to bring, the most evidence-based economic and socioeconomic research to our clients who are not-for-profits, government, community-based organizations, and even businesses, to make sure that they have all the evidence to make the right decisions. And we try to do that in a very collaborative way where we apply like intersectionality lens to our work. So we understand that, the way we grow up, where we grow up, the opportunities or privileges that we have in our lives shape those socioeconomic outcomes. And, we try to collaboratively solve those, systematic issues or whatever that we're solving to ensure that at the end of the day, the problems that we're solving for are humans. So I guess in a way you can say we kind of humanize economics through a socioeconomic lens.
Wow, I love that. Humanizing economics. That sounds really big, actually, and really important. How did you choose this profession? Or did it choose you?
I think the second, but I think, just like all choices, it's mutual. Like you also choose in some way. But I think economics is not something that I had known about. It's not something that I even knew the term while growing up. But I guess what really motivated me was that because I'm a first generation immigrant and I moved to Canada at the age of 11, I did spend, some working memory time in India. And during that time, my parents are also from an Indian village, and Indian villages are mostly really poverty ridden. And so I came, that's my origin, is that I'm from a rural area in India. And so I always find myself in these rural areas. And, growing up with, with my aunt and uncle and my family, I saw certain kids, they were my best friends. We played around. And I saw that my life took a different trajectory than theirs. And part of that was my parents. They got educated, they climbed out of poverty. They basically pushed themselves out of poverty. And I just thought, like, well, what if I wasn't born in my family? What if I was born in another one? Like I would be, that child. And since then, I understood that, education is a big catalyst for climbing out of poverty in rural areas. And so I knew that I would go and get educated somewhere. And my parents obviously had always pushed me all my life to get educated because they understood the value of it. So when I graduated high school, I wanted to do a gap year and travel the world. And they're like, yeah, good luck, over your dead body. So I went straight to, university at 17 years old. And so I think that kind of concept of, had I been born on another side, like, which is I think what John Rawls calls the curtain, like, what have I done in my lifetime, so that if in my next life I get born on that other side, is it a better society for that person? Have I done my job to make it a better society if I had fallen on that same curtain? Because it's just a chance and luck where we are born and whom we're born to. That I don't think that that's a total choice. And so I really think about that every single day. I feel deeply that that's the purpose of my life. How do I leave a better society behind through economics? And that's kind of my motivation. I went to school, to be honest, in psychology, because as I said, I didn't understand the concept of economics. I couldn't memorize anything, so I got like D's. And I was surely like, can't be doing a psychology major with D's. Like, this is not going to work out. So can't tell my parents about these grades. So better change, And I applied to business, didn't get in the first year. But then I got into it the second year. And, through getting into business, you have to take economics 101 and 102. And I just started to do well for the first time in my university year in economics. Like I just started to get really good grades because I got it. I could spend hours and hours and hours studying it, and it just felt to me like the thing that I'm good at. And while there has been some setbacks in my career, I've never felt that I shouldn't be an economist. I've always loved to be an economist. I love solving economic problems, and any way I can tie into economics is a sure way for happiness for me.
That's very inspiring. Thank you for sharing your story. I really appreciate that a lot, and I think it will touch so many of us. What about rural Canadian communities? What are your thoughts? You are an entrepreneur now. You live in a rural community, and some of your team works remotely. What
That's right.
What are your thoughts on rural Canada's economy?
Yeah, I think post COVID, I'd like to say that there is a huge potential for rural communities to grow. We've seen population growth in rural communities that we haven't seen before. Rural communities that are located close to urban centers are obviously seeing a higher growth than other rural communities. But nevertheless, like our today's world of remote work has really done a lot of growth for rural communities. It's allowed individuals and population growth to happen, which means more restaurants can grow, more restaurants can open, more shops can open. People see diversity that people haven't seen before because you have like a diverse population moving in that creates awareness, that talks about systematic injustices or at least sheds the light onto it, and it kind of, does a little bit of imbalancing of power, which is a catalyst to movement, which is change. Some folks lose their power and some folks gain it. And so it's a natural way of balancing what I felt like was a stagnant economy before. And it's just rebounding. So in short, I think rural areas have a lot of potential, and I'm happy to be a part of that growth.
What do you think rural communities are good at? So their strengths, and what do you think are some of the weaknesses of rural communities now, like in 2023, 2024?
Yeah. Well, I think I'll give you kind of the standard answer just because the standard answer I feel is the true one. I think rural communities have an insanely great community knit circle. So when I started my business, not having grown up in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, and only been living here for about 3 years, the amount of support and mentorship and community support that I got, I wouldn't have even gotten it, in Yellowknife where I had grown up. And so I felt like that's just the reality of a really small place. Now, in Yellowknife, I have all of my networks and, there's great mentorship and support there. But what I feel is that Yellowknife is still a city hub for Northwest Territories, and it's not totally rural. It is a city, and and I felt like all my life living in cities, people obviously want the best for you, but what's lacking is this sense of community, like this sense of like ownership in other people's success. Like we're a community, we're gonna do what it takes to build our community, and that's something that I learned for the first time after I moved to Yarmouth. I developed my sense of community well-being and contributing to my community, being proud of where I'm from. When an issue arises, like jumping into it with the rest of the community to solve it. Like those are things I learned only by living rurally. And I think that that's what rural communities do best. They solve their problems. They all come together, roll up their sleeves and get it done. And, you kind of don't see that. You don't understand that. You don't understand the value of that until you live rurally, I'd say.
And what about weaknesses? What could use some improvement?
Well, I think, rural communities really suffer because they're isolated in an infrastructure way. From what I've seen, transportation would be a big savior. If we are connected to urban centers, if we are better able to talent mobilize, knowledge mobilize our products, that's a sure win for rural communities. We have everything that urban centers do. But I feel that connectivity is key. And I think, frankly, a lot of folks probably want to live rural. Either they want to come back home or they want to live rural, but they can't because their career is still, stuck in the city. And I think that transportation and building the infrastructure and connectivity is what is required to alleviate some of that weakness.
What about trends? What are you seeing? What should people be paying attention to in rural communities?
I think diversity is the biggest trend folks should be paying attention to. You see all kinds of new people from all corners of the world and all kinds of restaurants popping up, of different ethnicities. And, rural communities are seeing a big flow of diversity that they haven't seen before, which is, I think, it's a great thing. So that's one trend. Secondly, I think I've seen this trend of, you know, individuals all across Canada and a lot across, similar countries, like appreciating the rural life for the first time. It was almost like a negative connotation. Like, I'm from a small town. I'm not from London, England or New York City. Like, I'm not so fancy, whatever that is. But now for a first time, being quiet, being in peace in nature is the new luxury for folks. And that's a new trend that, I didn't foresee seeing, but apparently that's the new luxury these days. So that's kind of a nice new trend. And I think, like I said, the economic piece, for the first time, we're seeing a trend of economic growth, population growth in rural communities, which I think is a great thing. But I think as a country, we've got to do a few more things for it to be sustainable, like fix our housing piece. So yeah, we can talk about that piece forever, but that's for another podcast, I suppose.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, what should people be paying attention to? What should people be focusing on? Or what do you wish people would focus more of their attention on? Perhaps municipal leaders or economic developers in small communities. What do you think that they should, be turning their attention to rather than this?
Yeah. Well, I'm hesitant to say that what I'm about to say will apply to all rural communities across Canada. It can kind of just say from an Atlantic point of view, but nevertheless, I think that there's some, similar conclusions to be drawn. And that, I think, is affordable housing. I think that housing is really a supply issue currently. There's just not enough supply. And I think, public housing has to play that role for a numerous amount of reasons. Number one, people are moving to rural communities, but they're finding it hard to find a place to live. So, if we want to retain those folks, like we should, that's necessary for economic growth, we've got to house them somewhere. And if their current salaries can't afford to buy a home, then I think they've got to look at renting. And we all know what that's like in rural communities. And so then I think about, well, maybe it's public housing. Maybe it's up to the government and the public to ensure that there's houses so that economic growth can take place. And so I think we've come from, I feel like maybe housing is a cycle. And, from World War II, after that, home ownership went up and now it's going down because of incomes, inflation, or whatever else is going on in the economy. So I feel like, building that housing piece is probably key to getting the labor force that we need for rural communities to grow.
Well, speaking of rural labor force, this is a passion of yours. And can you tell me about, what your company, the values and why you're passionate about it, but also how employment is so important in rural communities?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are really two important questions that I get to work on every day. And I also ask myself, well, I think I'll start with the second and just kind of explain, why socioeconomically, why that's important. And then, what I guess we're doing about it to address it. I think employment is everything. Lately I've been watching a lot of Animal Planet, and I watched like the Predator series. And last night I was watching like the polar bear Predator series. And, polar bears are winter creatures, so they eat and get fat all winter. And then they like hibernate for a few months where they lose their fat and they become incredibly skinny. And, polar bears can go travel like a long length without getting any hunts, and it's incredibly difficult due to climate change. But they never stop. They're persistent because that is the purpose of our life, to survive. That is human nature. No matter what we think, we get up every day, we fight for our lives. That is what we're born to do biologically. And that is what employment does. It gives a purpose to one's life, to have a job, to provide for your family, to provide for yourself, to be independent, to fight for your life. That is the purpose of our life. So employment is not just economic growth. Employment is the purpose of our life, in the means through which we live, the purpose of our life. And when we don't have that, I strongly believe that we have a lot of negative consequences, whether it be mental health, whether it be crimes, whether it be inequality, not being satisfied with your life, not finding the purpose, right? Now, I'm very careful to not mention income, because it doesn't matter how much money you make. What matters is that whether or not you're living the life in a way that you want. And employment gives a lot of dignity to folks, and that's key for fulfillment. And that is the reason why I feel that rural communities struggle a bit, because there's sometimes so few employment opportunities, or there's not enough of them in the diverse fields. So there might be one in one sector, might be one in another sector. It might not be the opportunity that you're actually wanting from your life, And so I'm convinced that rural communities really need a diverse set of economies, not just agricultural, not just fishing, but a wide range, so that people can pick where they best suit their talents, And without employment, there's huge inequality, as I spoke about it, crime, socioeconomic injustices. People can, kind of like, if through their insecure, when they're not employed, they can kind of pick political leaders that are not the best for society, and so on. And so I think that I'm convinced that employment is that, piece that can solve a lot of these injustices. And what we do as a company is to, create employment. I think that it's easy to hire from the city. There's a lot of, a lot more folks to hire from, but I think it takes a lot of patience to hire rurally, because that sometimes the skill set is not there yet, but you're going to have to mentor a lot for it. But those are patience, those are values that we embody, that we want to invest in our rural communities. And so there's just wonderful talent. Like, the amount of hard work that people are willing to put in is just incredible. The folks are really grateful. And on top of that, I think we've come across a lot of work that's for rural communities that, frankly, I don't think city folks understand, because they don't live rurally. How communities work, what incentives work for rural folks, just a lot of things you can't talk the talk if you don't live the talk, So I feel that that's essential for the work that we do. And so it's been my pleasure to see the company grow to the point where we can offer rural employment. And secondly, I'm very proud to be part of that diversification piece in the rural economy, where people get to live rurally, they get to work in the work that they want, they contribute to society the most, and feel fulfilled ultimately, to enjoy the hunt of life every day,
Oh gosh. Your words are so powerful. I think what you were talking about with housing and employment, those two go so well, they go hand in hand, because we don't have the housing, like you said. It's very, very expensive in a lot of rural communities to live, to buy a house, but you can't actually work in the place that you want to live, because there's not enough jobs that pay you enough money regularly to actually afford a home in that community.
Yeah.
And, that is a huge problem to solve. There's also, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. No, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead, Shauna.
No, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to briefly mention is that, sometimes before I've come across the sentiment like that's a rural issue, that's an urban issue. But in my mind, I think rural issues become urban issues. And I think when we talk about housing, that's a big part of it. Rural homelessness becomes urban homelessness. If we look at like the concentration of urban homelessness, a lot of those folks are actually folks that have moved from rural communities to find a job, a better life in urban areas, and found that actually not happen. And more sadly, they've lost their social networks, which is what's essential in hard times. And so I am, every time I hear like, well, that's a rural issue, I really think, well, for now it might be, but it's going to end up being an urban issue at some point as well.
Yeah, that is that human heart-centered approach that you take, and is so valuable that I don't hear anywhere else. And I just think you're so exceptionally wise when it comes to this. How do we address the elephant in the room? I know, and I'm going to say this as a white settler colonial person living in a rural community, there are systemic issues in rural communities that we can't ignore, like racism, homophobia, transphobia, and generally white supremacy. And, folks who are diverse sometimes have to code switch. They can't talk about their religion. They can't talk about their culture. They can't talk about their authentic selves for fear of being judged. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Social stigma is huge in rural communities. I mean, I find like it's a little bit easier for me because I didn't grow up in Yarmouth, that I don't have my past behind me, that I could settle here. Can't say the same thing for Yellowknife, for example, right? Because when you're growing up, you're a human being. Like, by the nature of our human being, we make mistakes, we learn, we grow up, Same thing, like going back to Animal Planet, like cubs make mistakes, cubs learn how to fight, which water to jump into and which ones not, because that is how we learn through life. That's how we fight our fight, like through making mistakes. And when those mistakes follow you and the social stigma follows you through life, people can't become the individuals that they ought to be, I think. And that's a big barrier. So I always recommend people to switch rural communities. If you grew up in one, settle in another, so that past doesn't follow you. Like, that's one sure way to get rid of it. The other one is just kind of being resistant to opinions that don't matter, and that's easier said than done, certainly. But I really think that one has to just have like that shield, that kind of that raincoat, because I mean, at the end of the day, anyone who's made it in life can tell you that they've made mistakes. And when folks look at someone, they understand the realities of life, they probably admire all of the things that a person has been through. And when that's not admired, I think it's just, when social stigma, prohibits someone from growing, I think that it's a societal thing. The society is not ready to be innovative, perhaps. It's a mindset. And I think diversity fixes it a little bit. When you have new folks coming in, you have introduced a different mindset. You change that a little bit, And then I think it's also up to the individual, is that the right place? Do I need to make a move? Because we can't control what it goes on around us, but we can control like what we do ourselves, And that's something that I've had to learn in business too. Like, when we're talking about pricing, like, to be able to hire rurally and create employment rurally, I've had to grow outside of rural areas. And if I'm solving economic problems, if I'm making society better, that's all that matters to me. I love to work on rural projects because those are the ones that I can bring my most kind of lived experience. But I also work on a lot of urban projects. And I think that what I've learned is that I've got to do what I've got to do in an honest and authentic way. And if that rubs someone off the wrong way, it's not something, to be honest, it's just not my business, But I've got to be fearless. And to be fearless, I've got to be honest. And to be honest, I've got to have some really strong values that are the truth, And I find like that's how I've managed social stigma myself, but I don't really, this is such a hard topic, when we talk about mental health clinics and so on, people don't show up to those in rural areas because of stigma. They don't want to go to the hospital because of stigma. And their stigma is such an inhibiting factor to so much good that there can be done. And I really think it needs to be addressed in a societal level. Some of it could be infrastructure, like, for example, phone, telehealth, making it more accessible for individuals to access it in a private way. But at the end of the day, I think individuals really need to make that move, like to travel away from home, to come back to it and not be the same anymore. And in that process, fight stigma and its expectations,
And what do you think white people's responsibility is? And I'm going to say, I'm going to say, witnessing. So I have witnessed people of color in meetings with me, virtual meetings, colleagues, we're pitching for a contract or something, and I get treated better. I get addressed.
Yeah.
I don't have to work as hard. I witness this. I see it, and I cannot unsee it. How, I guess we need to get to that point where more people are witnessing, like me, witnessing and quietly seeing it, and then acting, speaking, and actually reflecting back to that person. I noticed. I saw what happened. What would you like me to do? And it might be nothing. Maybe it's only acknowledging that you see it. But I think a lot of white settlers living in rural communities, because many of them are primarily white and have been in the past, they're diversifying now, but they're fearful. They don't know what they don't know. And there's no vulnerability. There's no humility. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. To be honest, I guess because I've been hidden behind the cloud of economics, I'm so trained to look at things objectively that sometimes maybe I don't notice these nuances. And I've, traveled 32 countries in my life, and I'd say like I haven't faced very much racism head on, but maybe it's also like me not seeing it. I'm not sure like which one it is, right? I think that, because I did study political science and, I try to look at everything from a scientific point of view, I really think that, I guess, white supremacy, if you would call that term, it happens because of unawareness, right? Which is huge in rural communities. Most folks haven't grown up with anybody of color. And so that human nature, by fear of not knowing, of the unknown, of the unfamiliarity, we tend to do certain actions, and some of them, can be labeled as racism, right? And so, I guess my answer is a lot forgiving than expected, but I've just found through my travels that, folks just behave in fear when they don't know what they're facing. And I've been, sympathetic to that, because when I don't know something, I also make stereotypes and prejudgments, which are frankly not true. And so I've tried to learn about it. When I face something new, I try to be curious about it. Through curiosity, I kind of fight that stigma, my unknown fear, my ignorance, frankly. It's through curiosity we can cure some of that. So I just feel that I encourage people to be more curious when in rural areas folks face diversity, like maybe go out to that new restaurant, or Google what, when was this country founded? What was the political, whatever, thing that happened? Like just through curiosity, I think people can address it. And I think, I guess to your question about, white folks having it easier. Well, I think that that's also natural to some degree in biologically, because we trust, right? Like the trust is the factor. So when you see someone that you're familiar with, like the way you can trust is easier. And when you see someone not familiar, your trust factor is like lower. So it's biologically like, we can explain those variations. Again, I'm talking about it in a very scientific view, but it helps me understand it, right? And I think, I think I've just had to learn about like, how do we build trust? Like, if someone's going to give me a contract or work with me and they haven't worked with a diverse supplier before, well, how can I build trust? How can I understand more of their culture? How can I understand the blind spots? How can I introduce like my own kind of ethnicity into those conversations in a sustainable way? Like, I can't just throw all at it at once. I have to do it in a sustainable, slow way where it can be grappled, it can be observed, and I think it's just building trust, and it really isn't only the responsibility of quote unquote white folks. I think it's a responsibility of also ethnic folks, how to assimilate into a new culture, how to learn new things, learn new language. I think it's both ways, to be honest with you. That's what I found, and I really learned that from traveling to other countries where people haven't spoke English and I was speaking English, and I was like, this sounds like colonialism over again. I expect people to know English when they really shouldn't, And so I actually, changed my viewpoint and started to learn their language and, Google at night, some Google Translate, some, verses to be able to say hi, hello, like, where do I go? Is this the right place? Whatever. How do I get a taxi, right? Because it was my responsibility. I'm in a foreign country where English is not the first language. I shouldn't expect people to know what I'm saying. I have to make that effort. So, I try to apply that same principle when I go to a new community and people are not familiar with what I offer or who I am and so on.
Again, very powerful. What's your hope for the future? What do you hope for rural communities? Maybe you and your rural community, but rural Canadian communities in general too.
My hope is to grow. I certainly don't want us to become urban centers, because there would be no differentiation between the rural piece that we have and the city life, which I've tried very hard to escape, but I still enjoy the city time to time, but in short intervals. I hope innovation for rural areas. I hope that people that want to create, that want that clear green field to think, to create, to have that mental peace, that they can find rural areas to be a haven, like a place to resort to create, to calm their minds, because that's where creativity flows. That's where you can be calm. With a calm mind, you can achieve much, and rural areas offer that luxury that frankly urban areas can't. And I hope my hope is that folks become a little bit less materialistic and more community oriented, more human, so that they can appreciate rural areas for what it is, its uniqueness, its rawness, its challenges, and just kind of the silence, the pure silence in which we can realize a lot.
And what do you think our responsibility is to take care of that green field and take care of, the haven that we have in rural communities?
Yeah. Well, now I'm going to provide a very uneconomic answer, I guess, which is to be content, to be happy with what we have. Not more, not less, I think when you're content, you are happy with what you have. You don't feel like this, capitalist need to acquire everything and grow beyond limits. This like kind of greed of hunger, or whatever you can call it, like this constant greed that can never be satisfied. That's vital for preserving rural communities. So I think, but the good news is I think that people that do feel contentment often gravitate towards rural communities, so that's the good news. I hope that rural communities can be a good kind of showcase to people that being content is okay in life, to be happy with what you have is perfectly fine, and in fact, probably folks that are hungry and, going at the run every day unsustainably wish that they could be content, And so I'd say like just being proud of content being the new level of happiness, you know. And I know that takes a lot of work to get there, and you know, but I really do think that at some point in one's life, one does realize that being content probably is a sustainable goal, you know. And what that content is obviously different for everyone, you know. I think we should always, like, further to get better is no means to say that, you know, oh, people should, you know, just stop where they are and don't feel the need to get better and to grow, etc. But I think materialistically, really evaluating where we're at, where we really need to be, where we want to be, because that also we deserve through hard work. But at some point, just say, you know, like, what's the number where I can just be happy and don't worry about, like, buying up all the land or all of the houses, and you know what I mean? Like, what is that number where I can just be who I need to be, you know, and just be happy with that. And that's my hope for rural communities, that more folks realize that.
That's a beautiful way to end. I think that we're going to need a part two at some point. But thank you,
Shana.
Thank you so much for your wisdom, because I think you're a very wise seer, and we're very lucky to have you in rural Canada. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Shauna. And I'm very pleased to see another entrepreneur, a rurally based entrepreneur, doing well and kind of promoting rurally based, rurally based organizations and rural Canada. I'm very pleased that you thought that I would be a good fit for this.
Of course.